My name is Claire Donovan. I was 27 when this happened, and 7 days before my wedding, I was sitting at my desk during lunch break with a red pen in my hand, grading a stack of 4th grade spelling tests, when I found out my mother had quietly canceled every vendor tied to my wedding. The flowers, the caterer, the venue, all of it. When I called her, she answered on the first ring like she had been expecting me. She said, very evenly, "I stopped a mistake before you ruined your life." I remember looking out the classroom window at the blacktop behind the school. 2 boys were arguing over a basketball. The crossing guard was adjusting her orange vest in the parking lot. Everything outside kept moving like it was a normal Tuesday. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just held the edge of my desk and listened. What I did not know yet was that my maid of honor had been keeping a folder in her apartment for almost 6 months. And inside that folder was the only reason my wedding happened at all. But to explain that, I need to go back to the beginning. Evan proposed on a Wednesday night in our apartment kitchen in a small town outside Knoxville, Tennessee. There were dishes drying on a towel by the sink. The overhead light had that soft yellow tint it always had, and the whole place smelled faintly like tomato soup because we had eaten late. He didn't plan anything elaborate. That was never really his style. He just reached into the pocket of his work jacket, stood there on the worn kitchen tile, and said, "I had a better speech in my head this morning, but I think I just want to spend my life with you." I said yes before he finished. Then we both laughed, partly because I was crying a little and partly because he looked so relieved. We sat on the floor beside the refrigerator for a minute, shoulder to shoulder, and I kept turning my hand under the light to look at the ring. For maybe 10 minutes, everything felt quiet and right. Then my phone rang. My mother. She didn't say congratulations. She didn't ask how he did it or whether I was happy. She said, "Have you booked a venue yet?" I remember glancing at Evan. He was leaning back against the cabinet, listening without trying to look like he was listening. I said, "No, Mom. We just got engaged." "Well, then you need to move quickly," she said. "These places get booked a year out. I can start calling tomorrow." That was how she operated. Not loudly. Not with obvious force. She moved in early, before anything had shaped, and by the time you noticed, she had already put her hands on it. When my dad died, I was 19. After the service, after most people had gone, she stood with both hands around mine and said, "It's just us now." She said it softly, like love. For years, that sentence lived in my body like a rule. So when I told her Evan and I wanted to handle the planning ourselves, there was a pause on the line. Not long, just long enough. Then she said, "Of course. You don't need me anymore." I felt the guilt before I even fully understood what was happening. So I corrected myself the way I always had. "No, Mom. I do want your help." Across from me, Evan's expression changed only slightly. A shift in the jaw. A small breath through his nose. He never pushed me when it came to my mother. He just paid attention. Over the next few weeks, the planning started in a way that looked helpful from the outside. I was teaching full-time. Evan was working long days at his cabinet shop. My mother offered to call a few florists because she had more flexibility. Then she offered to compare prices on caterers. Then she started collecting vendor contracts in a folder she kept in her tote bag. At first, I told myself it was fine. Then small things started changing. I wanted late summer flowers. Nothing too formal. Daisies, blue thistle, loose greenery, something that looked a little windblown and alive. My mother said cream roses were more elegant and would photograph better. I wanted smoked chicken, biscuits, roasted corn, and iced tea in glass dispensers. She said no one wants picnic food at a wedding. I wanted Evan's family close to the front because his grandmother couldn't walk well, and I knew the shorter distance would help. My mother redid the seating sketch and placed 3 of her church friends in the front row instead. Whenever I tried to push back, she got quiet first. Then wounded, then tearful. She had a way of pulling a tissue from her sleeve before I even saw the tears. "I'm only trying to make this beautiful for you," she would say. "One day you'll understand how much pressure this is on me too." On me too. That part always landed exactly where she meant it to. So I kept giving ground. Evan noticed. Of course he noticed. He spent more evenings out in his workshop behind the duplex, sanding wood or reorganizing tools that didn't need reorganizing. Sometimes I would stand at the back door and hear the low hum of the radio and the scrape of a stool moving across concrete, and I would know he was out there not because he had work to do, but because he needed somewhere calm to put his frustration. He still didn't say much. That was his way. He waited until he had something useful to say. My maid of honor, Leah, came by one Sunday afternoon for coffee and a planning session. She had known me since 9th grade. She sat at our kitchen table, turning a mug slowly between both hands, while my mother stood at the counter and casually replaced the bakery menu I had chosen with a different one she liked better. Leah watched the whole thing without interrupting. Later, when she was leaving, she paused on the front steps and looked back at me. Her face was calm, but there was something firm in it. She said, "I need you to trust me for a little while." I laughed because I didn't understand what she meant. About what? She shook her head once. Not yet. Then she got in her car and drove away. I stood there on the porch with the screen door pressing lightly against my shoulder, listening to the cicadas in the trees and the traffic from the main road a few blocks over. Inside, I could hear my mother moving dishes around in my kitchen like she already lived there. And for the first time, I had the clear, uneasy feeling that something had started long before I realized I was in it. Then I waited. A couple of weeks after that, my mother invited Evan to lunch without me. She called it a chance for them to talk like family. At the time, I let myself believe that meant things were getting better. I thought maybe she was trying. Maybe she had started to see what I saw in him. Maybe she was finally settling into the idea that I was actually getting married. Evan drove over to her house on a Saturday around noon. I stayed home and spent the afternoon folding laundry and trying not to check the clock every 10 minutes. The apartment was quiet except for the washing machine thumping in the hall closet and the old ceiling fan clicking once every rotation. When he came back, he set his keys down on the counter and stood there for a second. He didn't take off his jacket. That was the first thing I noticed. Usually, he came in and shrugged it off right away. That day, he kept it on, like he hadn't settled back into himself yet. I asked how'd it go. He looked at me for a moment, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "Your mother told me you had a breakdown in college." I remember the sound the washing machine made right then. A heavy spin cycle, then silence. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical. I said, "What exactly did she say?" He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down, forearms resting on his knees. "She said you were fragile. She said you had mental health problems and that I needed to understand what I was signing up for. She used the phrase damaged goods." For a second, I couldn't answer. The room didn't go dramatic or blurry the way it does in movies. It just got very still. The late afternoon light was coming through the blinds in thin stripes across the table. The dish towel by the sink smelled faintly like bleach. Somewhere outside, somebody started a mower. I had seen a counselor in college after my father died. That part was true. I was 20, exhausted, barely sleeping, carrying grief like a weight I could not set down. I missed classes for a while. I got help. Slowly, I got steadier. It was hard, but it was private. Not secret. Just mine. My mother had taken one of the most vulnerable periods of my life and turned it into a warning label. I sat down across from him and asked, "What did you say?" He looked at me in that direct, quiet way he had. I said I wasn't marrying someone broken. I was marrying someone who made it through something hard. I looked down at the table because suddenly my eyes were full. Not from shame, from relief. There is a certain kind of relief that feels almost painful when you are not used to being seen clearly. That was what it felt like. A few minutes later, my phone rang. My mother. I stared at the screen before answering. She did not ease into it. She said, "Evan was disrespectful to me." I said, "You told him I was damaged goods." Her tone changed immediately. Not louder. Sharper. I was trying to protect him. And you. Men like that isolate women. Men like what? Tradesmen. Men with no real ambition. Men who want to keep you small. I stood there in my own kitchen, one hand flat against the counter, and looked over at Evan, who was pretending not to listen while very clearly listening. I said, "He owns his business." He works harder than anyone I know." She gave a short breath through her nose. "Your father had a profession." That was the first time in years I answered her without softening it. "My father is dead, Mom. You don't get to use him like that." There was silence on the line. Then she said, very quietly, "Don't speak to me that way." And she hung up. I stood there with the phone still in my hand for a few seconds after the call ended. That was the moment something began to come into focus. Not all at once. More like fog lifting in sections. It was not about the flowers. It was not about the menu or the seating or the napkin color or whether my dress was too plain. It was about removal. She was trying to remove every path that led away from her. Over the next month, the rumors started. They spread in the way things spread in a smaller town, through side conversations and checkout lines and half-lowered voices in public places where people pretend they are not saying anything serious. I first noticed it at my hair appointment. Marlene had been trimming my hair since I was in high school. Her salon smelled like shampoo, aerosol spray, and warm curling irons. She fastened the cape around my neck and met my eyes in the mirror. She said, gently, "You doing all right, sweetheart?" I gave a small smile. "Sure. Why?" She hesitated. "Your mother stopped by yesterday. She said wedding stress had been hard on you." There it was. Simple. Soft. Plausibly concerned. I said, "I'm fine, Marlene." She nodded, but not like she fully believed me. The next day, it happened again at the grocery store. Then again outside church the following Sunday. A woman I barely knew touched my arm and said, "Marriage is a lot, honey. There's no shame in postponing if you need to." Postponing. The word landed oddly because I had never said anything about postponing. Neither had Evan. By then, I knew my mother was laying groundwork. Not openly. Never openly. She was creating a version of events that made her look caring and me look unstable. Leah texted me that Thursday night. "Do not react to anything your mom does this week. Trust me." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "You're starting to scare me." She replied almost immediately, "Good. That means you're paying attention." That was Leah. She could be warm for years and then, when something mattered, go very clear and very still. I didn't ask more, partly because I knew she would not answer, and partly because something in me had started to understand that she was working from information I did not have yet. A week later, my future mother-in-law called. Her name was Denise Cole, and she was not a dramatic person. She measured words the way some people measure flour. Carefully, without waste. Evan answered and put the call on speaker after the first minute because he could tell from her tone it involved me. She said, "I need to ask something, and I don't want you to misunderstand why." Evan said, "Okay." Then she told us my mother had called her the night before. My mother had told Denise that I had a history of episodes, that I had been emotionally unstable for years, that marriage might not be healthy for me, that Evan needed to understand what he was taking on. I sat down slowly while Denise was talking. The kitchen chair made a faint scrape on the floor. Evan said, very evenly, "Claire saw a counselor after her dad died." That's the full story. Denise was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I thought so. But your mother sounded convincing." Of course she had. That was her gift. Not lying exactly. Rearranging. Taking a fact, removing its context, and presenting it at the angle most favorable to her. After the call ended, Evan stood at the sink with both hands braced on the counter. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "Your mother isn't worried about you leaving hurt," he said. "She's worried about you leaving at all." I didn't answer right away because there was nothing to argue with in that sentence. The hard part about finally naming something is that once it has a name, you cannot go back to thinking it was confusion. That night I opened our wedding budget spreadsheet after dinner. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator motor and the soft grit of sandpaper from the back room where Evan was smoothing the edge of a bench he'd been building for a client. We had saved for almost 3 years. Bit by bit. No vacations. Used furniture. Old cars. Packed lunches. Side work on weekends. Every extra dollar tucked away because we wanted one day that felt steady and ours. The florist deposit was there. The caterer. The venue. The photographer. The rentals. I looked at the numbers until they stopped feeling abstract and started feeling like weight. If something happened to the wedding that close to the date, we would lose most of it. I knew the cancellation policies. I had signed the contracts. Or at least, I thought I had control of the contracts. That was the first night I had the clear thought I had been avoiding for months. My mother had access to too much. Vendor names, dates, contact numbers, copies of agreements, partial account details, too many openings. I closed the laptop. Then I put the phone face down, and I sat there in the kitchen listening to the sandpaper stop in the next room. A few minutes later, Evan came in and leaned one shoulder against the doorway. He asked, "What are you thinking?" I said, "I think she's building toward something." He nodded once, like he had already reached the same conclusion. Neither of us said what kind of something. Not yet, but the room felt different after that. Like we had stepped over a line we hadn't meant to cross. Like whatever came next was already moving. Then my phone buzzed. It was Leah. "Don't call any vendors yet. Just wait 2 more days." I read the message twice. Then I waited. I did not like waiting. That was the hardest part. Not because I wanted a confrontation. I didn't. I just wanted something solid. A fact. A document. A reason for the uneasy feeling that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. But Leah had asked me to wait, and by then I trusted her enough to do it. So I went to work the next day like everything was normal. I taught reading groups. I helped one student sound out a word she had missed 3 times already. I stood in the cafeteria line with a plastic tray and ate half a turkey sandwich I could barely taste. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somebody had spilled milk near the trash cans, and the custodian was mopping around it with slow, practiced strokes. Normal day, normal sounds. That almost made it stranger, because underneath it, I felt like I was standing over something hollow. That Friday afternoon, my mother came to the school. She did not call first. I was in the hallway refilling my water bottle when I heard her voice near the front office. Even from a distance, I knew the tone. Calm enough to sound reasonable, loud enough to travel. "I'm just concerned about my daughter," she was saying. "She's been under a lot of pressure, and I'm afraid she may not be thinking clearly." I stopped walking. For 1 second, I just stood there with my hand still on the fountain button, water splashing against the metal basin. Then I looked up. She was standing by the check-in desk in a light blue cardigan, purse on her shoulder, one hand pressed lightly to her chest. 2 parents waiting for dismissal papers had turned toward her. Mrs. Talbot from 5th grade was half out of her classroom door. The office volunteer had that fixed expression people get when they know something inappropriate is happening, but haven't decided whether to interrupt. I walked toward my mother slowly. My shoes made that soft rubber sound against the wax floor. When I got close enough, I said, "Mom, this is my workplace. You need to leave." She turned to me with that same look she had used for years. Hurt first, then disbelief, then public sorrow. "I came because I'm worried about you." "No," I said. "You came because people are listening." The office volunteer looked down at her clipboard. My principal, Dr. Benton, stepped out of his office just then. He was a narrow, careful man who spoke gently even when he was angry. He said, "Mrs. Donovan, I'm going to ask you to step outside." My mother glanced around the hallway. She saw the open classroom doors, the teachers pretending not to stare, the parents very much staring. She squared her shoulders. Then she said, "You'll all understand soon." And she left. The front doors closed behind her with a hard glass and metal sound that echoed longer than it should have. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the hallway started breathing again. A few teachers drifted back into their rooms. The volunteer adjusted a stack of papers that didn't need adjusting. Dr. Benton looked at me and asked, quietly, "Would you like 5 minutes?" I said, "No, thank you. I'm all right." And I was, mostly. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. But because something had changed in me. A month earlier, I would have followed her outside. I would have tried to smooth it over, explain, reassure, manage her feelings before my own. This time, I didn't. I went back to my classroom, shut the door, and erased the board for math. That afternoon, Leah came to my apartment carrying a thick accordion folder and a yellow legal pad. She didn't sit down right away. She set everything on the kitchen table like she was preparing for a meeting. Evan came in from the workshop a few minutes later, smelling faintly of cedar dust and machine oil, and one look at Leah's face told him to take this seriously. He took off his cap and sat down. Leah stayed standing. Then she said, "I need you both to listen all the way through before you say anything." The room got quiet. Outside, a motorcycle went past on the street. The ice maker in the freezer dropped a few cubes. Then nothing. Leah opened the folder. "The week your mother offered to take over vendor calls," she said, "I made backup copies of everything you had already shown me. Guest list, original inspiration notes, venue shortlist, budget sheet, contact names." I didn't say anything because I hoped I was wrong. I looked up at her. "You thought she'd do something like this?" Leah met my eyes. "I thought she'd do exactly what she always does. Take control slowly enough that nobody stops her until it's expensive." That landed hard because it was true. She sat down then and started laying things out. First, a contract. Not mine. A venue agreement for a private property called Ashby Grove, about 15 minutes outside town. Owned by a woman Leah knew through an event planning job she had worked the previous year. Deposit paid 6 months earlier. In Leah's name. I stared at the paper. There was a signature line, a date, a receipt attached with a paper clip. I said, "You put money down?" She nodded. $2,000. My throat tightened. "Leah, I know. Don't make a face yet. Keep listening." Next came a printed email chain with a florist in a nearby county, then a barbecue caterer, then a photographer who shot weddings on weekends, then a local musician. All of them marked as backup options. All of them available if activated within a certain window. She had notes in the margins. Wildflowers, yes, simple table setup, can do iced tea dispensers photographer flexible if confirmed by Monday. Evan leaned forward and looked over the pages without touching them. He asked, "How long have you been doing this?" Leah said, "Since the first time your future mother-in-law changed one of Claire's Bender contacts to her own number." I turned to her. "You knew that happened?" "You mentioned it like it was a small thing," she said. "It wasn't." Then she slid one more page across the table. A spreadsheet. Names, phone numbers, email addresses. Our original guest list. Not the revised version my mother had been managing. The original one I had made in the first weeks after getting engaged, before anything got filtered through her. Leah tapped the sheet with one finger. "If something goes wrong, I contact everyone directly. No dependence on your mom. No delays." I looked from the spreadsheet to her face and back again. For a second, I could not speak. It was not just that she had planned. It was how she had planned. Quietly. Methodically. No speeches. No panic. No drama. Just options, timelines, and paper. That was when the shape of her silence over the last few weeks finally made sense. She was not withholding. She was preparing. Evan let out one low breath and leaned back in his chair. Then he said, "What do you need from us?" Leah picked up the legal pad. 3 things, she said. She wrote as she spoke. Step 1. We stop assuming anything your mother touched is secure. She wrote it down. Step 2. We verify every vendor and account directly, but only after I finish organizing replacement paths. She wrote that too. Step 3. We communicate with guests only once, clearly, and as late as necessary. Then she set the pad down and looked at me. And from this point on, Claire, silence is not weakness. Silence is process. You do not call your mother to warn her. You do not react online. You do not explain. I nodded slowly. The strange thing was that hearing it framed that way made me feel calmer almost immediately. Not better. Not hopeful. Just organized. For months, everything with my mother had been emotional weather. Pressure, guilt, confusion, reaction. Leah was turning it into steps. Documents. Contacts. Procedures. Something I could stand inside. I asked, "What made you finally bring all this now?" Leah reached into the folder again and handed me her phone. On the screen was a screenshot of a Facebook post. My mother's account. The post read, "Please keep my daughter in your prayers." She's under more strain than she can handle, and some of us are trying our best to prevent a lasting mistake. A mother never stops protecting her child. No names. No direct accusation. She did not need them. In our town, everyone knew whose wedding was a week away. I handed the phone back carefully. Then I put my own phone face down on the table. No response. No correction. No defense. Leah was right. Anything I said now would only help her shape the story further. Evan stood, went to the sink, and filled 3 glasses with water. When he came back, he set one in front of each of us. Then he said, "Tomorrow morning we verify the vendors." Leah nodded. "Tomorrow morning." I looked at the papers spread across the kitchen table. Contracts, names, deposits, backup plans. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than dread. Not relief exactly, more like direction. Then my phone lit up on the table. It was my mother calling. None of us moved right away. Then I turned the screen over and let it ring. The next morning started with a checklist. Leah arrived at our apartment at 8:15 with coffee in a cardboard carrier and that same yellow legal pad under her arm. Evan had already cleared the kitchen table. I had pulled my hair back, put on an old gray sweatshirt, and set my laptop in the middle of the table like we were about to do taxes. In a way, it felt close to that. No speeches. No emotion first. Just verification. Leah drew a line down the center of one page and wrote original vendors on one side and backup plan on the other. Then she looked at me and said, "We do this in order. We don't skip around." I nodded. "Step 1, she said, confirm what was canceled." I picked up my phone and called the florist. The woman who answered sounded kind, but cautious in the way people do when they know a problem is coming before they know what kind. I gave my name. I asked for confirmation of the order. There was a pause while she pulled up the account. Then she said, "Mrs. Donovan, that order was canceled on Thursday." I wrote the date down. "Who canceled it?" Another pause. "Your mother called. She said the wedding was off and that she was handling everything for you." I thanked her. I kept my voice even. Then I hung up. Leah wrote it down in neat block letters. Florist, canceled by mother. Thursday next, the caterer. Same result. Canceled. My mother had called from her own phone, but signed a follow-up email with my name. Leah asked me to forward every email receipt and contract I still had access to. Then the venue. That one hurt the most. I had chosen it because it was simple. A restored brick hall with a white porch and a lawn in the back that looked soft in late afternoon light. Not flashy. Not grand. Just calm. When the manager confirmed that the reservation had been canceled 3 days earlier by the bride's mother on behalf of the family, I stared at the grain of the table for a second before answering. "Did anyone verify that with me directly?" "No, ma'am," he said. "We were under the impression she was authorized." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat very still. The kitchen smelled like coffee gone lukewarm and toasted bread from earlier. Evan was standing by the sink, arms crossed, jaw tight. Leah was writing dates and names and times as fast as she could, turning emotion into record before it could blur. By 10 a.m., we had a list. Florist. Canceled. Caterer. Canceled. Venue. Canceled. Rental company. Canceled. Cake order. Canceled. The photographer had not been canceled only because my mother had never liked the price and had delayed confirming the booking long enough that I had never signed the final approval. That detail almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so exact. Control had failed in one place only because she had wanted more of it. Leah drew a box around the confirmed cancellations and looked at me. "Now step 2, she said. We stop treating this like a family misunderstanding and start treating it like interference." That sentence mattered. A misunderstanding is something you smooth over. Interference is something you document. Evan sat down again and pulled the legal pad toward him. "What do we need to preserve?" Leah answered without hesitation. "Call logs, emails, voicemails, screenshots, contract copies. Any place she used Claire's name. Any place she implied authority she didn't have." I opened a folder on my laptop and created a new subfolder called Wedding. Inside that, another one called vendor issues. Then I started saving everything: email threads, PDF contracts, deposit receipts, screenshots of messages, a voice memo from the venue confirming the cancellation date. Leah texted herself notes after each call so there would be timestamps outside my own memory. I noticed something odd as we worked. The calmer I stayed, the clearer I became. That was new. For most of my life, anything involving my mother had pushed me into one of two places: guilt or confusion. Now that the problem was on paper, now that it had dates and names and account records, I could think. Not perfectly, not without hurt, but clearly. Around noon, Evan got a call from my mother. He looked at the screen and then at me. I said, "Put it on speaker." He answered. Her voice came through soft and measured, almost tired. "I've been trying to reach Claire." Neither of us said anything. Then she said, "I know she's upset, but someone needs to be the adult here." Leah stopped writing and looked up. Evan said, "You canceled our wedding." I corrected a situation that was getting out of hand. I spoke then. "No," I said, "you interfered with signed contracts without my permission." The line went quiet for a second. When my mother answered, the softness was gone. "Do not talk to me like I'm some stranger off the street." "Then don't behave like one." Leah looked at me, not surprised exactly, but attentive. My mother let out a slow breath. "Claire, you are not thinking clearly. You've been spiraling for months. I've had calls from concerned people, meaning people she had called first. I said, from this point forward, do not contact any vendor, guest, or member of Evan's family about this wedding. You can't give me orders." I just did. For a moment, all I could hear was the refrigerator hum and a dog barking somewhere down the street. Then she said, "You are making a serious mistake." I answered, "That decision is no longer yours." And I hung up. My hand was shaking when I put the phone down. Not badly, just enough for me to notice. Evan reached over and touched the back of my wrist once slightly. Leah did not say good job. She did not make it dramatic. She just drew a line under her notes and wrote, 12:07 p.m., instructed and no further contact. That was the thing about her. She understood that if you want control back, you don't perform it. You record it. By early afternoon, we shifted to the backup plan. Leah began confirming the alternate venue. Then the florist she had lined up in the next county. Then the caterer. She kept each call short, clear, and practical. "Yes, this is Leah Mercer. I'm activating the event for next Saturday. 190 to 200 guests. Outdoor setup. Bride prefers wildflowers and simple table arrangements. Yes, I can send the deposit today." While she worked the phone, Evan started making a supply list. Extra folding tables, coolers, signage for the road entrance, extension cords, ice, parking attendants if needed. He wrote with the same expression he wore in his shop when measuring a board twice before cutting once. No wasted movement. Watching the two of them side by side at that kitchen table did something to me I still find hard to explain. It was not rescue exactly. It was steadiness offered in practical form. Not, "It'll all work out." Not, "Don't worry." More like, "Here is the next task." Then the next one. Keep going. By 4 p.m., Leah had the alternate venue verbally confirmed. By 5:30, the florist was locked in. By 6 o'clock, the caterer was on board. By 6:20, a local photographer Leah knew from a previous event agreed to cover the wedding at a reduced rate because any friend of yours who needs help this fast probably really needs help. That line stayed with me. Probably really needs help. There was no gossip in it. No curiosity. Just recognition. That evening after Leah left, Evan and I sat in the quiet apartment with paperwork still spread across the table. The sun had gone down. The kitchen light cast a warm circle over the contracts and notes. Somewhere nearby, somebody was grilling, and the air through the screen door smelled faintly of smoke and cut grass. Evan asked, "Do you want to know what I think now?" I said yes. He looked down at the list for a moment before speaking. "I think your mother expected you to panic. I think she counted on you reacting emotionally, calling people, trying to explain, maybe even begging her to fix it." I knew he was right. That was the old pattern. She caused damage, then positioned herself as the only person who could restore order. I asked, and now? He answered, now she doesn't know where the center of this is anymore. I sat with that. It felt accurate. For the first time, the center of the situation was not her mood, not her version, not her pressure. It was this table, these notes, these timelines, these people helping quietly and on purpose. At 8:14 that night, my phone buzzed with a screenshot from a coworker. Another Facebook post from my mother. Please continue to pray for my daughter. Some people are encouraging her to make choices she may not be emotionally equipped to handle. As her mother, I can only do so much. This time there were comments underneath. A few soft-hearted women from church offering prayers. One woman writing, "A mother knows." I read it once. Then I handed the phone to Evan. He looked at it, handed it back, and said, "Save it." So I did. Screenshot. Timestamp. Folder. No response. Then I put the phone face down and opened a new document on my laptop. At the top, I typed, "Wedding recovery plan," and underneath it, I wrote 3 lines. 1. Confirm replacements. 2. Secure guest communication. 3. Say nothing until the day moves. Then I saved the file and closed the computer. Outside, the street had gone quiet. Inside, everything important was finally in order. Then Leah texted, "Tomorrow we handle the guest list. And Claire, your mom, just showed up at Denise's house." I read Leah's text twice. Then I called Denise. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, but I could hear strain under it, like she had already been holding herself still for a while. In the background, I could hear dishes and the low sound of a television from another room. She said, "I was just about to call you." I sat down at the kitchen table again. Evan stayed standing by the counter, watching my face. "What happened?" I asked. Denise took a breath. "Your mother came by around 7. Said she felt it was important that we speak woman to woman before it was too late." I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not because I was surprised, because I was tired of being right. Denise went on. "She told me you were becoming unstable. Said there had been incidents. She said I should think carefully about what kind of daughter-in-law I was welcoming into the family." The room stayed quiet while she said it. Evan did not move. He just looked down at the floor once, then back at me. I asked, "What did you say?" Denise answered in the same measured tone she used for everything important. I told her she needed to leave my porch. That was the first thing all day that made something unclench in my chest. Then Denise added, and I told her if she came back, I would not be as polite the second time. I said thank you. She said I didn't need to thank her. Then she said something I have remembered ever since. "Claire, adults who love you do not circulate doubt about you." There was no softness around that sentence. No extra comfort. Just clarity. After we hung up, I repeated it out loud. "Adults who love you do not circulate doubt about you." Evan nodded once. Then he said, "That goes in the file too." So it did. Leah came over the next morning with a fresh printout of the guest list and 3 colored markers. Yellow for text sent, green for confirmed, red for personal call needed. She had turned my original spreadsheet into an operation. We sat around the kitchen table again, and this time there was no uncertainty about what needed to happen. The guest list had to move out of my mother's reach completely. Leah said, "I'll handle the message, but it goes out only when everything else is locked." I asked, "What about my mother?" She didn't even look up from the page. "She gets nothing." The practical way she said it made it feel less like punishment and more like access control. That helped. Around noon, while we were sorting contact numbers, my principal called. His name flashed on my screen, and for 1 second I thought maybe there had been some issue at school with coverage or scheduling. Instead, when I answered, he asked, "Are you all right to speak privately?" I stepped onto the back porch. The late morning air was warm already. Somebody nearby had cut their grass, and the whole block smelled green and sharp. I could hear a leaf blower from 2 houses over and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I said yes. Dr. Benton told me my mother had called the school board office that morning. Not my classroom. Not the front office. The board office. She had said she was concerned about my mental state and that a wedding-related crisis might interfere with my ability to supervise children responsibly. I did not speak right away. The porch railing was warm under my hand. Then I asked, was anything put in writing? He said no, but I documented the call and informed HR that I had no concerns about your conduct or performance. That mattered. A record. A counter-record. I thanked him, and before we ended the call he said, gently, "Take care of yourself, Miss Donovan. And for what it's worth, we see you clearly here." I stood on the porch for a minute after that. The world looked very ordinary. A dog barked at nothing. A delivery truck rolled slowly down the street. A little girl on a pink bike went past with one shoelace untied, and my mother was now trying to attach her version of me to my job. That was the line. Not the wedding. Not the gossip. Not even Evan's family. My work. My name in a place I had built for myself. I went back inside, sat down at the table, and told Leah and Evan exactly what had happened. Leah didn't say a word at first. She just picked up the yellow pad and wrote down the date, time, office contacted, and Dr. Benton's response. Then she drew a box around it. Evan looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" For a while, I had been answering that question in pieces. I want to keep the wedding. I want the guests informed. I want the vendors secured. I want her to stop. But that was the first time I answered it as one thing. I want one controlled conversation, I said. Public enough to keep her contained. Private enough to stay respectable. Leah sat back in her chair. "Okay," she said. "Where?" I thought about my mother's house and rejected it immediately. Too much history. Too much furniture arranged around her comfort. I thought about our apartment and rejected that too. I was not bringing her into the center of our recovery. Then I said, the church office. Pastor Neil's conference room. Leah nodded. Neutral ground. That afternoon, I called the church and asked whether Pastor Neil would be available for a short family matter the next day. He said yes. His voice was careful, and I got the impression he already knew enough to understand why I was asking without needing the details. Then I called my mother. She picked up right away. I said, "I'll meet you tomorrow at 11 at Pastor Neil's office." A pause. Then she asked, "So now you're ready to talk sense?" "No," I said. "I'm ready to define terms." She did not like that. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Then she said, "Fine," and hung up. That night I slept less than I expected, but better than I had the week before. Not because I was calm exactly. More because the next step had shape. The next morning, I dressed the way I dressed for parent conferences. Navy slacks. Cream blouse. Hair pinned back. No effort spent trying to look softer than I felt. Evan offered to come. I said no. Leah asked if I wanted her in the waiting area. I said yes. That was enough. Pastor Neil's office sat behind the church sanctuary in a low brick building that always smelled faintly of paper, old carpet, and brewed coffee. The conference room had one oval table, 6 padded chairs, a cross on the wall, and a window looking out at the side lawn where somebody had planted azaleas years ago. My mother was already there when I arrived. She was seated with her purse in her lap, posture straight, ankles crossed. She wore a pale pink blouse and pearl earrings. She looked like a woman arriving for a committee meeting she expected to chair. Pastor Neil stood when I came in and gave me a look that was kind without being intrusive. Leah stayed outside in the lobby with a magazine she never opened. I sat down across from my mother. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Pastor Neil said, "Claire asked for this meeting, so I'm going to let her begin." I folded my hands on the table. And because I had spent the last few days inside dates, times, screenshots, and call logs, I did not have to search for words. I said, on Thursday, you canceled my florist. You canceled my caterer. You canceled my venue and represented yourself as authorized to do so. On Friday, you contacted Evan's mother again. On Monday, you came to my workplace and suggested to school staff that I was unstable. Yesterday, you contacted the school board office. My mother's expression shifted once at the word school board, but only slightly. Then she said, I was trying to protect you. I did not argue with the sentence. I said, you may not contact my workplace again. Her chin lifted. You don't get to instruct me. I do where my professional life is concerned." She gave a small, disbelieving laugh and turned toward Pastor Neil as if expecting him to restore the proper order of things. Instead, he said nothing. So she turned back to me. "You have no idea how hard I have worked for you." I said, "That is not what we are discussing." That was the first moment I saw anger move fully into her face. Not grief. Not injury. Anger. Other people in my life had always stepped in at that point. Smoothed things. Softened tone. Urged understanding. But there was nowhere for that pattern to go in that room because I did not leave any openings for it. I kept going. "You may not contact any vendor, guest, member of Evan's family, or school representative about me or this wedding again." She leaned forward. "I am your mother." "Yes," I said. "And this is still the boundary." The room got very still. I could hear a copier running faintly somewhere down the hall. Then my mother said, lower now, "You are humiliating me." I answered, "No. I am documenting what happened and preventing it from continuing." That was the moment Pastor Neil finally spoke. He said, "Diane, I think it would be wise to listen to what your daughter is saying." My mother turned toward him slowly, and for the first time since I had entered the room, she looked uncertain. Not defeated. Not remorseful. Just uncertain. As if she had expected witnesses, but not resistance. I reached into my bag and set one sheet of paper on the table. Not the whole file. Just one page. A simple typed note with 4 lines. No further contact with wedding vendors. No further contact with school staff or district personnel. No further communication about Claire's mental health to third parties. Any necessary future contact must be by letter or email only. I slid it across the table. Then I said, "This is how things will be from now on." My mother looked at the page but did not touch it. She said, "And if I refuse?" I held her gaze. "Then I keep records, and I respond accordingly." She wanted a fight. I could feel it. Something emotional. Something messy. Something she could point to later and say, "See, look how unstable she became." I gave her nothing she could use. After a few more seconds, she stood. She did not take the paper. She picked up her purse, looked at Pastor Neil, then at me, and said, "You'll regret shutting me out when this all falls apart." I said that's all I needed to say. Nothing more. No chase. No explanation. No repair. She left the room. The door closed behind her. Pastor Neil let out a slow breath through his nose and sat back down. He did not ask whether I was okay. I appreciated that. He just said, "Would you like me to keep a copy of that document on file here?" I said yes. So he did. When I stepped into the lobby, Leah looked up from the untouched magazine and read my face in 1 second. "How is it?" she asked. I handed her the extra copy of the boundary sheet. And I said, she heard me. Then my phone buzzed. It was a screenshot from Evan. A new Facebook post from my mother had gone up while I was still in the church office. I looked at the screenshot while Leah drove us back to my apartment. My mother's new post was shorter than the others. Some people only understand regret after they've cut the wrong person out of their life. I have done all I can. No names. No direct reference. Still enough. I saved it to the folder when we got home and did not respond. By then, I had stopped reading her posts as messages. They were evidence now. Date-stamped attempts to shape the story in public after failing to control it in private. That shift mattered more than I expected. Once something becomes evidence, it loses some of its power to haunt you. That afternoon, we finished the guest plan. Leah sat at the kitchen table with the spreadsheet, one hand around a pen, the other moving steadily down the list. Yellow for text sent, green for confirmed, red for personal call needed. Evan was on his laptop building a clean message draft with a new venue address, parking instructions, and one sentence explaining that the location had changed due to unauthorized vendor cancellations. Not sabotage. Not betrayal. Not family drama. Unauthorized vendor cancellations. Facts travel better when they are plain. By early evening, the alternate venue was fully secured. Deposit paid. Setup window confirmed. Catering locked. Flowers confirmed. Photographer scheduled. Music handled by a friend of Leah's cousin who played acoustic sets at local events and apparently knew how to arrive on time and not make himself memorable, which was exactly what we needed. The wedding was back on. Not in the same shape. In a better one. That was the quiet truth none of us said out loud yet. The next morning, Leah sent the first round of guest messages. Then she started making direct calls to the people most likely to pass information quickly and accurately: close relatives, old family friends, church women who knew everyone, the kind of people who served as unofficial communication routes in towns like ours. By noon, most of the guest list had been reached. By 3, nearly everyone had confirmed the new location. A few people replied with simple messages. "We'll be there. Got it. Tell Claire not to worry." One message came from a woman who had taught with my mother years earlier. "Honey, some of us have eyes." I'm glad somebody stepped in. I stared at that one for a second before saving it too. Not because I needed it for proof, because it reminded me I had not imagined any of this. On Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the wedding, one more piece fell into place. Evan got a call from a friend of his named Marcus, who did occasional security work for private events on weekends. He had heard enough of the situation to understand the outline. He asked one question. "Do you need somebody calm at the entrance?" Evan looked at me while he held the phone. I said yes. So Marcus became part of the plan. No confrontation. No scene. Just one steady person at the gate with a printed guest list and clear instructions. No one enters unless their name is there. That evening, after Leah left, I sat on the porch steps with Evan and listened to the neighborhood settle down. Somebody nearby was washing dishes with the kitchen window open. I could hear the low clink of plates. A moth kept circling the porch light. The air smelled like warm wooden cut grass. Evan leaned his elbows on his knees and asked, "Do you want to know what I think now?" I smiled a little. "You've asked me that before." "I know." I waited. He said, "I think your mother built her whole plan around you still being the version of yourself she understood best. The version that explained. The version that folded. The version that still believed she had to keep the peace." I looked out at the street. A car moved slowly past the stop sign and turned the corner without much sound. Then I said she didn't notice that version was already leaving. He nodded once. That was enough. Friday came quietly. Too quietly, almost. I taught my classes, cleaned out the pencil tray near the reading rug, sent a note home about a missing library book, smiled at people in the hallway, and let the day pass without giving it too much room in my head. At dismissal, Mrs. Talbot from 5th grade stopped by my room and placed a paper sack on my desk. Inside was a small lemon loaf wrapped in wax paper. She said, for after tomorrow, "You might not feel like cooking." That was all. No questions. No speech, just something useful. I thanked her, and after she left, I stood there for a moment with my hand on the bag. There are forms of kindness that do not call attention to themselves. They often matter the most. Friday night, I stayed at Leah's apartment. That had been her decision, not mine. She said, "Your mother knows your routines. Tonight, she does not get access to one." I did not argue. She took my phone around 10, not permanently, just long enough to stop me from checking anything I did not need to see. We drank tea in her living room. The lamp beside her couch gave off a soft amber light, and the place smelled faintly like laundry detergent and cinnamon because she always kept a candle burning in the kitchen. Neither of us talked very much. Every now and then she checked her spreadsheet. Most guests confirmed. A handful still pending. One number disconnected. 2 voicemail boxes full. Then, just after 11, one more message came through on Evan's phone. It was from my mother. Not to me. To him. It said, "You still have time to stop this." He did not answer. He saved it and sent me a screenshot in the morning. Saturday, the wedding day, began at 6. Leah was already up and dressed in sweatpants, moving through her apartment with a headset on like somebody running a small command center. The kitchen table was covered in papers. Guest list. Seating notes. Directions. Vendor contact sheet. One legal pad page titled Arrival Issues in case anything unexpected happened. I stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee I barely touched and watched her work. She was calling people calmly, one at a time. Yes, the venue changed. Yes, the address in the text is correct. Yes, please ignore any older information. Yes, parking attendants will be there. Not rushed. Not flustered. Just clear. By 8:30, the last of the important guests had confirmed. By 10, the florist had arrived at the new venue. By 11:30, the caterer was on site. By noon, Leah finally lowered herself into a chair and said, "All right, now you can get dressed." I laughed then. A short, tired laugh, but real. The dress was not expensive. It was ankle-length cream with simple sleeves and a soft square neckline. I had bought it months earlier from a small bridal consignment shop in Chattanooga because I liked that it felt like something I could breathe in. My mother had called it underwhelming when she first saw it. That memory no longer had any weight. By 1:30, I was dressed and sitting very still while Leah pinned back the last sections of my hair. Her apartment window was cracked open. I could hear a lawnmower somewhere outside and the faint sound of birds in the tree near the parking lot. On the dresser beside me sat my shoes, a small compact mirror, and the folded handkerchief my aunt had mailed me the week before. When Leah finished, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "There you are. Not you look beautiful. Not finally. Just there you are." And that felt right. At the venue, guests began arriving around 2:30. Ashby Grove was quieter than the original hall, more open, less polished in the formal sense, but warmer. The ceremony space sat under a row of old trees with white chairs set in neat lines. The late summer flowers were exactly what I had wanted from the beginning, light, a little loose, not too arranged. The tables were simple. The food smelled like smoked chicken and buttered rolls. Somebody had strung lights across the far side of the lawn, though they would not show until later. As guests came through the entrance, many of them paused for a second and looked around with that same surprised expression. Not confusion. Recognition. Like this version made more sense. Evan's mother found me first and took both my hands. She said, "This feels like you." I did not realize how much I needed to hear that until she said it. The ceremony itself passed in a way I still remember more by feeling than sequence. The air warm on my shoulders. The slight give of the grass under my shoes. Evan's expression when he saw me start down the aisle. The sound of one child somewhere near the back whispering too loudly and being hushed. My uncle clearing his throat before he sat down. The quiet after the vows, when everyone seemed to lean into the same stillness at once. And then we were married. No interruption. No collapse. No correction from the sidelines. Just the thing itself, happening. I did not know until later what was happening 15 minutes away. My mother had gone to the original venue. She arrived dressed for the wedding, expecting an audience and an empty space large enough to prove her point. What she found instead was only an empty reservation and a locked building. No florist truck. No rental delivery. No guests. No family. No me. She started calling people. Me first. Then Evan. Then Denise. Then a cousin of mine. Then one of the women from church. Most of those calls went unanswered because by then everyone who mattered knew where to go and why the location had changed. The message Leah sent had been simple and factual. It said the wedding had moved due to unauthorized cancellations by a family member and asked guests to keep the details private to avoid further interference. That one sentence had done its work. Eventually, someone answered one of my mother's calls and told her where the wedding actually was. So she drove to Ashby Grove. By then, Marcus was at the entrance with the guest list. He told me later that she stepped out of her car with the expression of someone still expecting the situation to reorder itself around her if she stood firmly enough. She gave her name. He looked at the list. Then he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on it." She told him she was the bride's mother. He said he understood, but he could only admit listed guests. She tried again. He repeated himself. When she realized people nearby could hear, her tone changed. Softer first, then sharper, then strained. But Marcus did exactly what he had promised to do. He did not debate. He did not escalate. He did not improvise. He just held the line. That was all it took. She left. No dramatic scene. No police. No screaming across the lawn. just a boundary enforced by someone who had no history with her and therefore no reflex to excuse her. I learned all of that the next day. During the wedding itself, I knew nothing. I was eating dinner at a long table under string lights. I was listening to laughter move down the row. I was watching Evan's nephew spill lemonade on his own shoe and look personally betrayed by it. I was hearing my own name spoken in a tone that carried no worry. That was the real resolution. Not my mother being turned away. Not the town figuring things out. Not the screenshots or the posts or even the call records. It was the fact that her interference had finally failed to define the day. On Sunday morning, I woke in our apartment with my dress hanging from the closet door and my shoes on their sides near the bed. The house was quiet. The light through the curtains had that pale, washed color it gets early in the day. I could smell coffee from the kitchen. Evan was already up. When I came out, he handed me a mug and his phone. There was one last thing on the screen. A voicemail transcript from my mother, left at 11:42 p.m. the night before. It said, "I hope one day you understand what you've done." I read it once. Then I handed the phone back. And I said, "I do." Then I took my coffee to the table and began sorting the papers we had used to get through the week. The Monday after the wedding, I went back to work. That was important to me. Not because I was pretending nothing had happened. It was more that I wanted my life to keep its shape. I wanted the ordinary parts back where they belonged. I unlocked my classroom at 7:12, turned on the lights, and stood there for a moment with my bag still on my shoulder. The room smelled like dry erase marker, paper, and the faint lemon cleaner the custodians used over the weekend. There were math worksheets stacked in the tray by the copier. One chair was upside down on a desk because somebody had forgotten it on Friday. I set my bag down. Then I started putting the room back in order. Chairs down. Window blinds open. Date on the board. Morning work packets in neat rows. Pencils sharpened. That kind of work steadied me. One small thing at a time in the right place. By 8 o'clock, the hallway had filled with the usual sounds. Backpacks bumping into lockers. Teachers calling greetings. A student asking whether today was library day when he already knew perfectly well that it was. Nothing in that building expected me to explain my weekend. Nothing in that room wanted a version of me shaped by somebody else's fear. At lunch, Mrs. Talbot stopped by my classroom door. She held up an empty paper loaf bag and said, "Did you eat the whole thing?" I smiled and told her yes. She nodded once like that was the correct answer and left. That was all. No one at school asked for details, and I was grateful for that. A few people were kinder around the edges. A pause in the doorway. A hand on my shoulder. A cupcake on my desk that Friday from the office secretary with no note attached. Quiet things. The most useful kind. At home, the week moved slowly in a good way. After dinner, I washed dishes while Evan dried them and stacked them by the stove. He had a habit of setting plates down more carefully than necessary, as though every object in the kitchen had earned his respect. On Wednesday evening, I sat at the table with a pad of paper and a pen and wrote thank you notes. One for Leah, one for Denise, one for Marcus, one for Mrs. Talbot, even though the lemon loaf had technically belonged to the whole event only in my mind. When I got to Leah's note, I had to start over twice. The first draft sounded too formal. The second sounded too emotional in a way that did not feel like me. On the third try, I wrote the truth plainly. You protected something I could not protect alone at the time. I will not forget that. That was the right sentence. I mailed it the next morning. A few days later, Leah came by after work still wearing her office clothes, kicked off her shoes at the door, and sat at our kitchen table like she had 100 times before. I made tea. Evan brought in a plate of sliced pears and pretzels because he believed every conversation should have a practical snack next to it. Leah looked around the kitchen, at the dish towel hanging crooked from the oven handle, at the mail stacked in one corner, at the low yellow light over the sink. Then she said, "This is what I wanted for you. Not the wedding. Not the story. This. A room where nothing was being managed for someone else." I understood what she meant. The town settled too, in its own way. People had already started doing the math before the wedding. Afterward, they did not need much help. My mother's public posts, my absence from her side of the story, the sudden venue change, the fact that she had not been present anywhere in the actual ceremony photographs that circulated later. Those things said enough without anyone building a bonfire out of them. I heard pieces of it, mostly secondhand. Someone at church had asked too many questions and been met with silence. A woman at the salon had said, "Well, I think we know now why things changed." One of the venue managers, after reviewing the emails signed with my name, agreed in writing that I had not authorized the cancellations. The florist refunded part of the deposit. The caterer refunded more. Not every dollar came back, but enough did to turn panic into inconvenience and then, eventually, into memory. I kept copies of everything. Every screenshot, every voicemail transcript, every vendor email, every note from that week. Not because I planned to use them, because I was done letting the facts live only in people's moods. My mother and I did not speak. Not right away. About 3 weeks after the wedding, my uncle called and said she had asked whether I would meet with her. I stood at the kitchen sink while he talked, one hand around a wet glass, the late afternoon sun coming through the window above the faucet. I asked why now. He took a second before answering. She says she wants to explain. I looked outside at the backyard fence, at the patch of basilea had given me in a clay pot months earlier, at a line of towels moving slightly in the warm air. Then I said, "I'm not ready for explanations." My uncle understood that. He always had a way of understanding things without making people defend them. A week later, he called again and said my mother had started seeing a counselor. Not regularly, not gracefully, probably, but she had gone. I didn't know what to do with that information at first. I still don't entirely. I wasn't interested in turning her into a villain made of one solid material. That would have been too simple, and simple is not the same as true. She was a woman who had lost her husband too early. A woman who had built her identity around being needed. A woman who had confused closeness with control for so long that when I stepped outside it, she treated my adulthood like betrayal. That explains some things. It did not excuse them. Both of those can be true at once. About 2 months after the wedding, I wrote her a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A letter. I sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon while Evan was out in the workshop, and I wrote slowly enough to hear what I meant as I wrote it. I told her I loved her. I told her what she had done in plain language. I told her that if there was ever going to be a relationship again, it would have to happen inside rules that protected both of us, not just her feelings. No more contacting my work. No more speaking about my mental health to other people. No more interference in my marriage dressed up as concern. If she wanted a place in my life, it would not be through access. It would be through trust rebuilt over time. I did not ask for a response. I mailed it anyway. Then I went outside and watered the basil. That is the part people don't always understand when they hear a story like this. The ending was not one conversation. It was not a perfect apology. It was not a clean reunion where everything meaningful got said in the right order. It was routine. It was order. It was learning what peace actually looked like when nobody was shaking it to see what would fall out. A Tuesday evening walk after dinner. A clean kitchen. School lunches packed in the fridge. My name on a mailbox beside Evan's. A Saturday morning when the only urgent thing in the house was whether we had enough coffee. That is what I got back. And that was enough. Sometimes I think about how close I came to losing the day entirely. Not because the wedding itself mattered more than the marriage. It didn't. But because that week forced me to see something clearly for the first time. You can love someone and still refuse the version of love they offer you. You can keep the door unlocked in theory and still decide that they do not get to walk through it whenever they want. You can be calm and still be firm.